Get off my lakefront!
Ma'am, this is my property.
Your property? That's adorable. I've been running events here for 4 years. 60 people paid to be here today. You're just some living in a cabin.
I'm asking you politely to...
Politely? Honey, let me make this real simple. You don't matter here. You never did. Take your sad little fishing rod and crack shack before I have you removed.
I stood there holding my coffee while she screamed at me on my own shoreline. 60 guests on my grass. A cash box on her table, collecting $35 a head to trespass on my land. I didn't yell back. I didn't need to. I've spent 18 years hunting fugitives for the United States government, and I'd already started building her case. My name's Garrett Holloway. I'm 45 years old. For 18 years, I've carried a badge issued by the United States Marshal Service. I've kicked down doors in Detroit at 3 in the morning. I've pulled fugitives out of crawl spaces in Appalachian hollers where the roads don't have names. I've sat in parked cars for 14 hours waiting for a man to walk out of a gas station so I could put him in handcuffs without anyone getting hurt. Patience isn't something I practice. It's my profession. It's the reason I'm still alive. And most of the men I've chased are sitting in federal facilities. 2 years ago, my wife Renee was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She was 42, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. That's how fast it moves. One day she was planting tomatoes in our backyard in the Richmond suburbs. 6 months later, I was standing in a cemetery, holding a folded flag that didn't belong to me. It belonged to her father, a Korean War veteran, and she'd wanted it on her casket. After she passed, I couldn't stay in that house. Every room had an echo. Her coffee mug still sat on the counter. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. I'd walk into the kitchen at 6 in the morning and smell cinnamon from a candle that wasn't burning. So I sold it. Took the equity and bought a 3.2-acre lot on Smith Mountain Lake in Bedford County, Virginia. Cedar-sided cabin, leaning dock with a south-facing shoreline. The kind of place where the only sounds are water lapping against pilings and the occasional osprey screaming at a fish. Renee always said she wanted to retire on a lake. I figured I'd do it for both of us. The first week was everything I needed. I fished off the dock at dawn, replaced 3 rotted planks, sat on the porch with bourbon, and listened to absolutely nothing. The smell of pine resin and wood smoke hit me every time I opened that cabin door, and for the first time in 2 years, the tightness in my chest loosened by half a turn. Day 3 changed the trajectory of everything. I was staining the porch rail when a white Cadillac Escalade parked diagonally across my driveway. Not near my driveway, across it. Like she was blocking a crime scene. The door opened, and out stepped a woman I'd come to know better than most fugitives in my career. Cheryl Pemberton, 55 years old, platinum blonde hair that hadn't seen its natural color since the Clinton administration. Gucci sunglasses pushed up on her forehead. Linen blazer over yoga pants, the universal uniform of women who confuse attending meetings with accomplishing things. And a clipboard. Always a clipboard. She walked up my steps like she owned them, and extended a hand with nails the color of arterial blood. Cheryl Pemberton, I'm the heart and soul of Stillwater Bluffs. I shook her hand. Garrett Holloway, I just bought this place. Oh, I know. We know everything that happens here. She smiled like that was charming instead of unsettling. Then she launched into a monologue about community standards, neighborhood cohesion, and the cherished tradition of using my lakefront for HOA events. She asked if I'd be willing to continue allowing access for community gatherings. I told her no, politely, clearly. The way you tell a suspect their cooperation is appreciated, but their presence is no longer required. Her smile froze, not a frown, a freeze, like someone had pressed pause on a human expression. We'll see about that. She turned and walked back to her Escalade. I watched her go. I knew that look. I've seen it on men in handcuffs who think they're smarter than everyone in the room. It never ends well for them. Over the next week, I learned more about Cheryl Pemberton than I ever wanted to. Nolan told me she'd been HOA president for 9 years, which, in HOA terms, is roughly the equivalent of a 30-year dictatorship. She ran board meetings the way some people run hostage negotiations. Disagreement wasn't tolerated. Questions were treated as personal attacks. She once fined a family $200 because their garden gnome was inconsistent with the community's visual identity. The gnome was 3 inches tall. Her husband Todd sat on the Bedford County Planning Commission. Between the two of them, they'd built a little empire of petty authority. She ran the neighborhood. He had a seat at the county table. Nobody challenged them because challenging one meant dealing with both. It was a protection racket, disguised as civic engagement. The neighbors who'd lived here longest had learned the same survival strategy. Keep your head down, pay your dues, and never, ever make Cheryl feel like she isn't in charge. Those who hadn't learned that lesson had moved away. 3 families in 5 years, according to Nolan. All of them sold at a loss. All of them left quietly. I wasn't planning on leaving, and I don't do quiet. 10 days later, I caught a case in Charlotte. 3 days tracking a parole violator who'd skipped on an armed robbery charge. Standard work. Long hours, bad coffee, motel pillows that smelled like bleach. When I finally got the guy, found him sleeping in his cousin's garage, I drove straight home. I pulled onto my road at dusk. Something was wrong before I even reached the cabin. Tire tracks carved deep ruts into the grass beside my driveway. I parked and walked down to the lakefront. What I found made my jaw tighten. Solo cups everywhere, crushed beer cans glinting in the fading light. My dock had fresh scrape marks where something heavy had been dragged across it. Wooden stakes had been driven into the ground, marking some kind of walkway that didn't exist before I left. Charcoal scorch marks blackened a 10-foot patch of grass near the water line. Somebody had hosted a full-scale party on my property while I was gone. I called my neighbor, Nolan Briggs, 62 years old, Navy veteran, carpenter by trade. Lived at Stillwater Bluffs for 22 years. He answered on the second ring. "Nolan, what happened on my lakefront?" He sighed the sigh of a man who'd been waiting for this phone call. "Cheryl happened. She's been doing this for 4 years, Garrett. Sets up events, charges $20 to $30 a head. Cash box and a Venmo sign. Where the money goes, only Cheryl knows. 4 years. She'd been running a paid event business on someone else's land for 4 years. And nobody had stopped her. I sat at my kitchen table that night and wrote a certified letter. Cited my deed. Referenced the recorded property survey from Bedford County. Included the relevant section of Virginia Code Section 18.2-119, criminal trespass. In Virginia, that's a Class 1 misdemeanor. Up to 12 months in jail, up to $2,500 in fines. I sent copies to every member of the HOA board, every single one. 5 days later, Cheryl responded. Not with an apology, not with a conversation, with a stack of violation notices thick enough to qualify as a novella. Dock aesthetics, $200 per day. Vehicle parking violations, $150. Lawn height exceeding community standards, $100 per day. Cabin exterior paint not conforming to approved palette, 14-day compliance deadline. Total assessed, $4,350. More paperwork than I generated on federal case files involving actual criminals. The woman produced bureaucracy the way a thunderstorm produces lightning, effortlessly, violently, and without any regard for where it landed. I reviewed every notice. Not one had been properly voted on by the board. All were self-signed by Cheryl. Her signature was the only authority behind them. They were about as legally binding as a grocery list on a cocktail napkin. I responded in writing, cited the CC and RS requirement that all violations must be approved by a majority board vote, pointed out the absence of any recorded vote in the meeting minutes, noted that none of her cited violations appeared anywhere in the original CC and Rs, not the dock aesthetic clause, not the vehicle parking restriction, not the cabin paint standard. She'd invented 4 separate rules, applied fines to all of them, and signed the documents like she was stamping passports at a border crossing. Here's something most people don't know about HOA violation notices. They're not legal citations. They're not court orders. They're letters from a private organization. If the violation doesn't exist in the governing documents, the fine is unenforceable. Period. You don't have to pay it. You don't have to respond to it. And if the HOA tries to enforce a fabricated violation in court, they'll lose, and often owe your legal fees under state consumer protection statutes. I scanned every page, printed timestamps, filed it all in a folder on my laptop that I labeled Pemberton File. I had a feeling that folder was going to get thick. I was right. No one called me the following Tuesday. "You're going to love this. Cheryl just announced a summer splash cookout. Guess where?" My lakefront. Your lakefront. And this one's bigger. She's retaliating. I sat on my porch that evening and listened to the katydids singing in the trees. The lake was glass. A bass jumped near the dock, and the ripple caught moonlight. Somewhere across the water, a screen door slammed. I took a sip of bourbon and thought about what Renee would say. She'd probably tell me to be patient. She'd be right. Saturday morning came warm and still. I was on the porch with coffee, watching a great blue heron stand motionless in the shallows. The bird had more patience than most people I've arrested. Around 9, the first car appeared on the road, then another, then a pickup pulling a trailer loaded with folding chairs. A setup crew descended on my lakefront like a military operation, if the military were staffed entirely by people in cargo shorts. Tents went up. Folding tables appeared. Portable speakers the size of small refrigerators materialized on my grass. Someone staked a new sign into my dirt. Stillwater Bluffs HOA, Community Lakefront Area. No unauthorized vehicles. No unauthorized vehicles. On land where she was the one without authorization. The irony was so heavy it could have sunk the dock. The smell hit me next. Coconut sunscreen mixed with lighter fluid. Charcoal smoke curling up from 3 grills I'd never seen before. Then the music started. Sweet Home Alabama, at a volume that made the water vibrate. I could feel the bass in my floorboards. By noon, I counted 45 to 50 people. Kids jumping off my dock. An inflatable flamingo tied to my dock cleat. A teenager doing cannonballs that splashed water onto my fishing gear. A man in a Hawaiian shirt was mixing margaritas on a table that sat exactly where Renee's memory garden would have gone. Then Cheryl arrived. White sundress, straw hat, clipboard in hand. She moved through the crowd like a bride at her own reception, directing caterers and pointing at speakers like she was staging a royal wedding. When she spotted me on my porch, she waved. "Oh, Garrett, so glad you decided to join us." I walked down to the waterline. "This is my land, Cheryl," she laughed, turned to the crowd. "Did you all hear that? He wants to take away our lakefront." A few people chuckled. Some looked uncomfortable. Most didn't look at all. It was like watching someone park in your living room and then complain about your furniture. I looked around. A teenage girl was doing handstands on my dock. A man I'd never met was hammering a horseshoe stake into my grass. A woman had hung a Happy Birthday Brenda banner between 2 of my fence posts. Brenda, apparently, was celebrating her 50th on property she'd never owned, rented, or been invited to use. 3 kids were digging a sandcastle at the waterline, and one of them had carved Stillwater Bluffs into the wet sand, like they were claiming the territory for a small nation of sunburned suburbanites. Cheryl had set up a table near the path entrance. On it, a metal cash box, a printed QR code for Venmo, and a sign that read, "Summer Splash, $25 per person." She was literally selling tickets to trespass on my property. If chutzpah were taxable, this woman would owe the IRS a fortune. I pulled out my phone and started photographing everything. The sign, the tents, the cash box on the registration table, the cars parked on my grass, every plate number, every face. Cheryl watched me from behind her Gucci lenses. Taking photos? Cute. I walked to the sign, pulled it out of the ground, and laid it by the road. Cheryl screamed like I'd set fire to a church. "That's vandalism. That's destruction of HOA property." She pulled out her phone and called 911. 20 minutes later, a Bedford County officer arrived. Young guy, polite. He looked at the sign, looked at the crowd, and asked to see my deed. I showed him. He read it. He looked at Cheryl. "Ma'am, this is his property. The sign was on his land without his permission. But the HOA has always used this lakefront. That doesn't transfer ownership, ma'am. I'd recommend moving the event." Cheryl folded her arms. The officer left. The party continued until dark. I walked the grounds afterward with a flashlight. Cigarette butts ground into dirt. Pool noodles abandoned in the shallows. Beer cans bobbing against my dock pilings like aluminum ducklings. Tire ruts so deep you could have planted corn in them. I photographed every inch. Cataloged it the same way I document a crime scene. Angles, distances, context shots, close-ups. My phone storage was filling up with evidence of suburban entitlement. In 18 years of federal law enforcement, I'd never imagined that the most persistent offender I'd face would be a woman whose primary weapon was a laminated name tag and an aggressive sense of ownership over things she didn't own. The next morning, I found one more thing. Someone had spray-painted "Community Access" on the wooden post at the entrance to my shoreline path. White paint, block letters, still tacky to the touch. I photographed that too. Cheryl wasn't finished. She was just warming up. The following week, she sent an email blast to the entire community. In it, she described me as someone trying to claim exclusive ownership of shared lakefront amenities. She announced a $300 special assessment to fund legal action against me. Let me say that again. She asked my neighbors to pay her to sue me for using my own land. The audacity wasn't just breathtaking, it was Olympic caliber. Then came the dock demolition threat. Cheryl declared my dock structurally unsafe, based on what she called a visual inspection. She'd conducted this inspection from approximately 60 feet away, through Gucci sunglasses while standing on dry land. Her construction expertise was limited to choosing backsplash tile, but apparently that qualified her to condemn a dock that had stood for 30 years. She sent a formal notice threatening emergency demolition if I didn't bring it into compliance within 10 days. That's when Todd Pemberton entered the picture. Cheryl's husband, 58, sat on the Bedford County Planning Commission, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice was the practiced calm of a man who'd learned to threaten people without technically threatening them. Just a heads up, Garrett. Some concerns have been raised about your cabin's zoning compliance. It'd be a real shame if someone flagged it for a county review. I let the silence hang. In my line of work, silence is more useful than words. Then I said, "Thanks for the call, Todd. Virginia is a one-party consent state. That means I only need my own permission to record a phone conversation." Todd had just handed me his voice on a silver platter, and my cabin had grandfathered status from the original 1987 build. Any zoning review would confirm what I already knew. The physical escalation came next. I left for a 2-day case in Roanoke, came back on a Thursday evening, walked down to the dock to check the lines on my boat. Third plank from the end. Something was wrong. I knelt down and ran my hand along the underside. The plank had been sawed halfway through. A clean, deliberate cut through the middle of the support beam. Not weather damage, not rot. Someone had taken a handsaw to my dock. If a kid had jumped on that plank, and kids had been jumping off my dock every weekend, it would have snapped. Broken ankle at minimum. Worse if they went through and hit a piling. I crouched there in the fading light, ran my fingers across fresh sawdust, smelled the green cedar scent of newly exposed grain. Someone had come onto my property in the dark and sabotaged a structure that children played on. I stood up slowly, looked out across the lake. The water was dark glass. A bullfrog croaked somewhere under the dock, steady and indifferent. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. I've been angry before, and anger makes you sloppy. This was colder, more precise. This was the feeling I get when a fugitive case stops being a search and starts being a prosecution. I've chased men who've done terrible things. Men who've hurt women. Men who've cooked methamphetamine in trailers with children sleeping 10 feet away. And somehow, a woman sawing through a dock plank that kids jump on hit a nerve I didn't know I had left. I walked to the fence post at the top of the rise and checked my trail camera. The footage was time-stamped 2:14 a.m. A man in dark clothing, handsaw in his right hand, walking onto my dock from the shoreline path. When he turned toward the camera, the infrared caught his face clearly. Todd Pemberton. His truck's license plate was visible in the driveway pullout. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I needed the full picture. 18 years of chasing people had taught me that the arrest isn't the goal. The conviction is. I drove to the Bedford County Courthouse the following Monday, spent 3 hours pulling public records, HOA financial filings going back 6 years. What I found, or rather what I didn't find, told the whole story. There was no line item for event revenue. Not a single dollar recorded from any lakefront gathering. I did the math on a legal pad. $20 to $35 per person. 40 to 80 attendees per event. 4 to 6 events per year. 4 years running. Conservative total, $47,200. That money existed nowhere in the HOA financial statements. It had vanished like smoke through a screen door. Virginia's Property Owners Association Act, Section 55.1-1815, gives any homeowner the right to inspect HOA financial records. The association must provide them within 5 business days of a written request. Cheryl had refused 3 times. 3 written requests, 3 refusals. Each refusal was a separate violation of state law. I didn't find the missing money at the courthouse. I found it at a diner in Bedford. Ellen Trevino was the HOA treasurer, 48 years old, quiet woman, the kind who takes notes at meetings and never speaks above a conversational volume. She'd reached out through Nolan, asked to meet somewhere away from Stillwater Bluffs. I found her in a corner booth at a place called Biscuit and Barrel, hands wrapped around a coffee mug that was full but untouched. Her hands were trembling. She slid a manila envelope across the table. "I've been keeping 2 sets of books," she said. "The ones Cheryl shows the board, and the real ones." I opened the envelope. Inside were bank statements, deposit records, and the articles of organization for a company called Pemberton Event Services, LLC. Registered in the state of Virginia. Sole member, Cheryl Ann Pemberton. Every dollar from every lakefront event had been deposited into the LLC's account at a bank in Lynchburg. $47,200 total. The HOA hadn't seen a penny. That's not a bad neighbor. That's a textbook embezzlement operation running under the cover of a clipboard and a linen blazer. I drove home that night with Ellen's envelope on the passenger seat, and a feeling I recognized from years of casework, the feeling of a file becoming a case. I called Cal Whitfield from the cabin porch. Cal was a deputy sheriff in Bedford County, 50 years old. We'd been fishing buddies for 6 years, 22 years in the department. Good cop, straight shooter, no politics. "Cal, I need to show you something, and I need it done clean." He came to the cabin the next evening. I laid the Pemberton file out on my kitchen table. Deed, survey, violation notices, certified letters, photos, trail camera footage, Ellen's financial records, Todd's recorded phone call. 4 months of documentation arranged chronologically. Cal sat down, read through every page, watched the trail camera footage twice. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his jaw. "You built this like a federal case. Habit." We talked strategy for 2 hours. If we arrested Cheryl quietly, a knock on her door, handcuffs in the kitchen, she'd control the narrative. She'd tell the neighbors it was a misunderstanding. She'd play the victim. She'd spin it before the ink dried on the booking sheet. I'd seen it happen with white-collar criminals dozens of times. But if the arrest happened in public, in front of the community she'd been stealing from, the illusion would shatter in real time. No spin, no narrative, just facts witnessed by everyone she'd fooled. "Here's what people don't understand about HOA power," I told Cal. "It's almost entirely imaginary. An HOA president can't arrest you, can't seize your property, can't issue subpoenas, can't deputize volunteers or authorize searches. In most states, including Virginia, an HOA's actual enforcement power is limited to what's written in the CC and Rs, and even that is subject to state law and judicial review. The real weapon isn't the rule book, it's the illusion that the rule book is law. And the only way to break that illusion is to let everyone see it shatter at the same time." Cal nodded slowly. "So you want the audience. I want 80 witnesses who can't be gaslit afterward." We built a plan. 4 steps. Step 1. I posted metal no trespassing signs on every access point to my lakefront. Not paper, not cardboard. Steel signs bolted to treated posts, citing Virginia Code Section 18.2-134.1. Under Virginia law, once signs are posted and a written warning has been delivered, any entry onto the property is a criminal offense. Cheryl had received 3 written warnings. Step 2. I installed 3 additional high-definition security cameras covering every angle of the lakefront, dock, and driveway, all cloud-synced. Even if someone smashed the cameras, the footage was already uploaded. I was building a courtroom, 1 camera at a time. Step 3. Cal prepared arrest warrants. Cheryl Pemberton, criminal trespass, fraud, felony embezzlement. Todd Pemberton, criminal mischief, conspiracy, abuse of public office. The warrants were signed by Judge Patricia Kincaid and sealed. Nobody would know they existed until the cuffs clicked. Step 4. We waited. Cheryl had already announced her crown jewel, the 4th of July Lakeside Spectacular. $35 per person, a country band, fireworks, 80 to 100 people expected, on my land. She was selling advance tickets to what would become her own arrest scene. If irony were a currency, Cheryl would have finally contributed something of value to the community. I repaired the sabotage dock plank that week, pulled the cut plank out, measured it, drove to the hardware store in Bedford, and came back with a pressure-treated replacement. I lay on my stomach on the dock, bolting the new beam into place, and thought about what kind of person deliberately weakens a structure where children play. The old plank smelled like sawdust and bad intentions. I replaced every bolt on the 3 surrounding planks too. Checked each one by pressing my full weight onto it, bouncing twice, solid. I also replaced the lock on the access gate and added a chain across the boat launch. Not to keep anyone out permanently, just to make sure that the next person who entered my property had to actively choose to ignore a locked barrier. In court, that matters. Over the next 2 weeks, I met quietly with 6 neighbors who'd been bullied by Cheryl over the years. Nolan had been fined $3,000 for building a storage shed on his own property. The Westbrooks had been forced to remove a safety fence around their pool because it was aesthetically inconsistent. The Crawfords had been threatened with legal action for walking their golden retriever on the beach. Every one of them was willing to testify. The night before the 4th, I sat on the dock alone. Fireflies pulsed over the water, like tiny signal lamps. The air smelled of warm pine and lake mud. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon and watched the last light fade behind the Blue Ridge. I thought about Renee, about how she would have handled Cheryl, probably with more grace and less documentation. But grace hadn't worked. Documentation was going to. Tomorrow, I said, to nobody. But Cheryl wasn't waiting for the 4th to finish her campaign. 2 weeks before the holiday, she launched a smear operation that would have impressed a political consultant. She sent an email to every household in Stillwater Bluffs, with the subject line, Community Safety Alert. The text read, Mr. Holloway maintains an extensive firearms collection. He lives alone. He exhibits reclusive behavior. He has been hostile toward community leadership. I encourage all residents to exercise caution. She turned a federal marshal into a neighborhood threat. A man who'd spent 18 years protecting the public was being painted as a danger to it. The email didn't mention my badge, didn't mention my career, didn't mention that the extensive firearms collection was a single duty weapon issued by the United States government. Details don't matter when fear is the product you're selling. The effect was immediate. Neighbors who used to wave from their driveways stopped making eye contact. A mother pulled her 2 kids inside when I drove past on the road. I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper one morning. Yellow paper, blue ink, shaky handwriting. We don't want trouble. That note stung more than I expected. Not because of anger, because I recognized what it was. Fear, not malice. These were decent people who'd been fed a story by a woman who manufactured fear the way a factory manufactures widgets, efficiently, constantly, and without any emotional investment in the product. I'd seen this before, in cases where witnesses are intimidated, in neighborhoods where one person controls the information flow. Cheryl wasn't just an HOA bully. She was running a disinformation campaign from a lakeside subdivision, and she was better at it than some of the actual criminals I'd pursued. At least criminals usually have the self-awareness to know they're breaking the law. Cheryl genuinely believed she was the victim. The worst part was what she did to the Hendersons. A young couple, early 30s, who'd moved in 6 months before me. They'd put a kid's swing set in their backyard, well within their lot lines, properly assembled, bolted to concrete footings. Cheryl fined them $400 for an unapproved recreational structure. When they appealed to the board, Cheryl was the board. She rejected the appeal in writing and added a $50 administrative processing fee. The Hendersons took the swing set down. Their 5-year-old daughter watched from the kitchen window while her father unbolted the thing with a socket wrench. That story stayed with me. Todd made his next move the following week. He arranged a special waterfront compliance inspection through his contacts on the Planning Commission. A county inspector showed up on a Wednesday morning. Nice enough guy. Walked the property. Checked the cabin's foundation, roof line, setback from the water line. Found nothing. My cabin had been built in 1987 and carried grandfathered status that predated the current zoning ordinances by 15 years. As he was leaving, the inspector paused at his truck, looked back at me. Your place is fine, just so you know. Someone pulled strings to get this visit expedited. Normally we're backed up 8 weeks. I nodded. I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate people who maintain their properties. 3 days later, Nolan got fined $500 for a noise disturbance. His crime? Standing in his own driveway talking to me at normal volume on a Tuesday afternoon. Cheryl had filed the complaint with a timestamp and a description of the disturbance. It was retaliation, pure and plain. The HOA equivalent of a medieval siege. Starve out the allies until the target surrenders. Nolan's response when I called to apologize. Garrett, I've survived 2 deployments, a divorce, and a kidney stone the size of a walnut. I'm not afraid of a woman with a clipboard. The last piece fell into place a week before the 4th. Ellen called me from a number I didn't recognize, a prepaid phone. I found something else, she said. Cheryl has a liability insurance policy on Pemberton Event Services. She's been paying premiums for 3 years. Liability insurance. For an event business. Operating on someone else's property. She knew. She'd always known she was operating illegally, and she'd insured herself against the consequences. This wasn't ignorance or entitlement. She'd built a system. A deliberate, documented, insured system for stealing from her neighbors while partying on my land. The morning of July 3rd was the quietest morning I'd had in months. Mist hung low over the lake like cotton pulled thin. Somewhere out in the fog, a loon called. That eerie, echoing cry that sounds like loneliness given a voice. I stood on the dock with a fishing rod and let the stillness soak into me. In 24 hours, this place would be full of noise. I wanted to remember the silence. At 8:15 a.m., a white box truck turned onto my road. Behind it, a flatbed carrying a portable stage. Behind that, Cheryl's Escalade. The convoy drove past 3 steel, no trespassing signs without slowing down. The setup crew moved with practiced efficiency. Tents went up in 20 minutes. Folding tables lined the shoreline. String lights were draped between poles I hadn't seen before. A sound system appeared on the portable stage. 2 portable bars materialized near the waterline. A banner stretched between 2 oak trees. 4th of July Lakeside Spectacular, hosted by Pemberton Event Services. Then someone ran an extension cord from my utility pole to the sound system. They were running the party on my electricity, on my dime. The crew foreman, a heavy-set guy in a ball cap, walked down to the dock where I was still holding my fishing rod.
Are you the property owner?
I am. The lady said this was HOA managed land.
It's not.
He looked back at the setup, then at me. We got a contract. Keep a copy. You're going to need it. He walked away slowly, like a man doing math he didn't enjoy. I noticed one of his guys had stopped unloading and was taking pictures of the no trespassing signs with his phone. Smart man. When the dust settles, the people with documentation survive. The people without it hire lawyers. By noon, they'd run an extension cord from my utility pole to the sound system. My electricity, my meter, my bill. Cheryl wasn't just trespassing on my land. She was literally charging me for the privilege of hosting her own party. If audacity were an energy source, this woman could have powered the entire sound system herself. By afternoon, my lakefront looked like a county fair. A registration table sat at the entrance with a cash box and a printed sign. Pemberton Event Services, cash and Venmo, $35 per person. Not HOA event, not community gathering. Pemberton Event Services. She'd dropped the pretense entirely. Cheryl arrived at 10 for her inspection tour. She wore a lanyard with a laminated badge that read, Event Coordinator. She'd promoted herself from HOA President to Event Coordinator. Same hat, rotated 45 degrees. She walked the grounds checking tent stakes and speaker placement, like a general reviewing troop positions before battle. I met her at the dock. Those signs are harassment, she said, pointing at my no trespassing posts. Get off my land, Cheryl. She took off her sunglasses, looked me dead in the eyes. Your land? Honey, this lakefront belongs to the community. It always has, and tomorrow, after the fireworks, everyone's going to remember who takes care of them and who tries to keep them out. I said nothing. She turned and walked away. Her heels left puncture marks in the dirt path. Evidence, if nothing else. That night, I called Cal from the cabin. Through the window, I could see the string lights glowing over my lakefront like a carnival that had set up camp in my yard. 2 units at the marina by 5, Cal said. We'll come in quiet around 7, after the band finishes, before the fireworks. Make sure there are witnesses. 80 people, Garrett. Only person who won't see it coming is her. Across the lake, someone tested a firework. A single burst of red and gold that spread across the black water like a wound. I watched it fade. The 4th of July was going to be spectacular, just not the way Cheryl planned. The 4th broke hot, 91 degrees by noon, not a cloud. The kind of Virginia heat that makes the air shimmer over asphalt and turns skin pink in 20 minutes. By the time I walked down to the lakefront at 2 o'clock, I counted 83 people. Families, kids in swim trunks, couples in lawn chairs, a 4-piece country band on the portable stage, playing covers of songs about trucks and cold beer. Cheryl was in a red, white, and blue sundress. Patriotic cosplay from a woman who'd spent 4 years violating property law, constitutional rights, and basic human decency. She moved through the crowd like a small-town mayor. Handshakes, hugs, selfies. Every few minutes, she'd check the cash box at the registration table. The box was getting heavy. The smell of hickory smoked brisket hung so thick in the air you could taste it. Kids cannonballed off my dock in sequences of 3 and 4, sending spray across the swim platform. A man in American flag swim trunks did a backflip off the end. Impressive, honestly, and surfaced to applause. An elderly couple slow danced near the stage to a song I didn't recognize. It would have been a beautiful scene if any of it had been legal. At 6:45, the light went golden. That perfect Virginia summer light that makes everything look like a photograph from a better time. The band finished their last song. Cheryl stepped up to the microphone on the portable stage. She tapped it twice. Can everybody hear me? I just want to say, welcome to our 4th annual Lakeside Spectacular. Applause. Whistles. We've got fireworks coming at 8:30, but first I want to thank. She stopped. She was looking past the crowd toward the road. 2 Bedford County Sheriff's cruisers sat at the end of my driveway. No lights, no sirens. They'd come in quiet, just like Cal said. Cal Whitfield stepped out of the lead cruiser. 3 deputies fell in behind him. They walked down the road toward the lakefront at an unhurried pace. Not slow, not fast, steady. The pace of men who know exactly what they're about to do and have no interest in rushing it. The crowd parted. Not because anyone told them to, because a uniform, walking with purpose, creates its own path. Cal reached the stage, looked up at Cheryl. She recovered quickly, I'll give her that. Officer, welcome. Can I get you a plate? Cheryl Pemberton? That's me. She spread her arms like she was accepting an award. Ma'am, I have a warrant for your arrest. The crowd went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence where you can hear ice shifting in a cooler 30 feet away. Cheryl laughed. A short, nervous sound. This is a joke, right? Cal, tell me this is a joke. Cal didn't smile. He read the charges in a voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. Criminal trespass on posted property. Fraud. Embezzlement exceeding $1,000. A felony under Virginia Code Section 18.2-111. Cheryl's clipboard hit the stage floor. It bounced once on the plywood and landed face down. I could see the printed schedule on the back. 8 o'clock, dessert table. 8:15, raffle drawing. 8:30, fireworks. She'd planned the whole evening down to the minute. She just hadn't scheduled the arrest. This is ridiculous. I am the president of this HOA. I built this community. You can't. Do you know who I am? Cal waited for her to finish. Yes, ma'am. You're the person named in this warrant. Cheryl pointed at me. I was standing near the dock, 30 feet away, arms crossed. That man has no authority. He's just some nobody living in a shack. Cal looked at me, looked back at Cheryl. Ma'am, that man is a United States Deputy Federal Marshal, and you've been trespassing on his property for the past 14 months. The silence that followed was different from the first one. The first silence was confusion. This silence was understanding. 83 people, recalculating everything they'd been told. Cal stepped onto the stage. Cheryl backed up. There was nowhere to go. He turned her gently by the shoulder and placed the handcuffs on her wrists. The click of metal on skin was the loudest sound on the lake. Crickets had started in the tree line. The sunset reflected orange and pink off the water. A beautiful evening for accountability. Across the party, 2 deputies approached the beer table, where Todd Pemberton was sitting in a camp chair. He saw them coming. Didn't run, didn't argue. They read him his charges: criminal mischief, conspiracy, abuse of public office. He stood up and put his hands behind his back without being asked. He looked like a man who'd always known this ride would end. He just didn't know what the last stop looked like. They walked Cheryl and Todd up the road past the crowd, past the registration table with the cash box, past the sign that read Pemberton Event Services, past 3 steel, no trespassing signs that she'd driven past that morning without a second thought. At 8:30 p.m., the fireworks went off. Cheryl had set them on a timer. Red, white, and blue explosions blooming over a lakefront that was now an active crime scene. Deputies taking statements under bursts of color. Evidence tags on the cash box. Cheryl's clipboard in an evidence bag. It was the most perfectly ironic thing I'd ever witnessed. She'd planned the grand finale. She just didn't know she was the show. The crowd took a long time to leave. People stood in clusters, talking in low voices. A woman in a sundress approached me near the dock. We had no idea, she said. She told us this was HOA property. An older man, 70 maybe, stopped on the road. I paid $35. I thought I was paying the HOA.
You were paying Cheryl, I said.
She's the only one who saw that money. Nolan walked over after the last car pulled out. He stood beside me on the dock. The fireworks had stopped, but the smoke still hung in the air, smelling like sulfur and burnt paper.
Took you long enough.
Had to let her sell enough tickets. He laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from the man. The legal consequences arrived with the efficiency of a system that finally had the evidence it needed. Cheryl was charged with felony embezzlement for the $47,200 she'd funneled through Pemberton Event Services. Additional charges: criminal trespass on posted property, fraud. Her mugshot made the Bedford Bulletin. The linen blazer was replaced by an orange jumpsuit that didn't match her complexion. Todd was charged with criminal mischief for the dock sabotage, conspiracy for the coordinated harassment campaign, and abuse of public office for weaponizing his planning commission seat. He resigned from the commission the following week. The official statement said he was stepping down due to a personal decision to focus on family. In my experience, that phrase exclusively means got caught. The HOA held an emergency meeting. Cheryl was removed as president by a vote of 89-4. I have questions about those 4 people. Specifically, I'd like to know what version of reality they're operating in, and whether it's available by prescription. Ellen Trevino testified before the Bedford County Grand Jury. She was granted immunity in exchange for full cooperation. She told them everything: the dual books, the LLC deposits, the pressure and threats that Cheryl had used for years to keep her silent. How Cheryl had told her that if she ever spoke up, she'd make sure Ellen never held a position of trust in Bedford County again. Ellen cried on the witness stand, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, the quiet kind. The kind that comes from 4 years of carrying a secret that weighed more than she could hold. The embezzled funds were identified and recovery proceedings initiated. Pemberton Event Services LLC was dissolved by the state. HOA dues dropped 30% once the phantom expenses disappeared. Every fraudulent violation Cheryl had issued, the dock fines, the paint citations, the lawn height penalties, was vacated by the new board. Nolan Briggs was elected interim HOA president. First thing he did was publish the real financial records: actual income, actual expenses, actual budget. Posted them on the community bulletin board at the mailbox station, and emailed them to every household. Transparency, it turns out, is not that complicated when the person in charge isn't stealing. Second thing he did was abolish the facilities committee, which had never been a committee at all. Just Cheryl wandering around with a clipboard, inventing violations like a one-woman regulatory agency, with no oversight and no shame. Third thing he did was apologize, in writing, to every homeowner who'd been fined without cause. The Hendersons put their swing set back up. Their daughter helped. 3 months later, Stillwater Bluffs held its first legitimate community event. Stillwater Community Day. Free admission, proper permits, on common area land that actually was common area land. Nolan brought a cooler of homemade lemonade. The Westbrooks brought their kids and the safety fence they'd been forced to remove. They set it up around the kiddie area, and nobody said a word. The Crawfords brought their golden retriever, who jumped into the lake within 4 minutes and refused to come out for 2 hours. I grilled burgers on a proper grill, on my own property, with my own permission. The old man who'd paid $35 on the 4th walked up and handed me a cold beer. This is what community is supposed to feel like. I took the beer. Yes, it is. That evening I sat on the dock alone. Fireflies drifted over the water. A whippoorwill called from the ridge. 3 notes repeating in the dark. The air smelled of warm pine and clean water, and the last traces of charcoal smoke. I thought about Renee. She would have loved this place. She would have loved these people. She would have organized the community day better than Nolan did, with color-coded sign-up sheets and a dessert table that put my grilling to shame. And she would have absolutely, without question, despised Cheryl Pemberton. I raised my glass to the empty chair beside me. We made it to the lake, sweetheart. The breeze picked up and pushed a ripple across the cove. It caught the last light and split it into 100 tiny flashes, like the lake was winking. I sat there until the stars came out. No clipboard, no Escalade, no screaming about violations, just the water and the dock, and the sound of a community finally breathing without permission. If you've ever dealt with an HOA president who confused a volunteer title with a crown, drop your story in the comments. You'd be surprised how many people have lived through the